Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 259 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's where you'll find all my resources. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com, Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about how he programs his accumulation and intensification phases in season, progressing and regressing the pull-up, and knee-dominant exercise options. That was from a great thread on StrengthCoach.com. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Alwyn Cosgrove joins me to talk about how much space you need to start out with. What's the minimum when you're opening your first gym? For the Functional Movement System segment, Eric DeGatti is back to talk about the top 5 myths and misconceptions about the functional movement screen and functional movement systems. For the Train Heroic data-driven coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson about flexible programming. Remember, check out trainheroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know Anthony sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro and Elite editions. For the bodybyboyleonline.com, hit the gym with the Train Coach segment. Geralyn Coopersmith is back. She's the fitness consultant who worked with companies like Perform Better and FMS. She's also had leadership roles with Equinox, Nike, and Flywheel Sports. She was my first manager in the fitness business, actually. And she just did an excellent lecture at Perform Better called The 4 A's of Propelling Yourself from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And today we're going to talk in depth about the other 2 A's, action and accountability. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. So last week we covered the first 2 A's, which was awareness and attitude. So there's so much to unpack in this. Geralyn does an amazing job with this. So lots of things to get to. Let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day answering questions. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, Coach, how you doing?
I am doing great, Anthony. My stock answer, people are probably so sick of hearing that I'm doing great, but I don't want to lie.
I think they might be tired of hearing you say they're tired of hearing that. There you go.
Could be that too.
Coach, somebody wrote about basic periodization progression doubts, and that was on the forum, and it was a pretty good thread. And I just kind of wanted to dive into a little piece about your accumulation phase and intensification phase. So you were talking about you're going to change you like to change every 3 weeks, and basically you're going to alternate between accumulation and intensification. So in the 3-week progression, you might do, let's say, 3 by 8, 3 by 9, then 3 by 10 over those 3 weeks, right, in that accumulation phase. But you'll use the same size kettlebell. Then when you intensify, you're going to go 3 by 4, 3 by 5, 3 by 6 with the next size up. So in that case, you might accumulate with a 16K and then intensify with a 20K. My question is, it doesn't seem like enough. Are you adjusting along the way in terms of somebody might say, hey, man, this 16K is just not enough. I mean, it was fine last week for 8, but, how do you kind of manage all of that piece of it?
Well, it was interesting because this was more about a thread about in-season. And I think that what you run into in-season is guys who don't want to lift heavy. So I think, it's easy. If people are getting stronger and want to go up, that's easy. I think it was Luis that started the thread. Yeah. And I think he's working with soccer, and you've got guys who really probably, you're the dentist, you're like going in and freaking ripping their teeth out every day. They don't want to be there. They don't want any part of the weights. And so it's kind of like that progression that I described was, okay, this is a way that we can sneakily get somebody stronger. And I did it with some of the Red Sox pitchers. I did it with, I had Andrew Miller, who was one of those guys, 6'7" and very lanky and not a weightlifter. And I use that. I think the idea actually originates from Easy Strength, if I'm not mistaken. But just this idea that, you can, if someone says, hey, you got 30 weeks, you can make some progress over 30 weeks without that person feeling like, oh, I got sore, or he was constantly making me lift more weight, or, it was very, really gradual. It's kind of like walking up a long, slow incline versus walking up a big hill. So that was really what that particular part of that thread was geared towards.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I kind of use that same idea in general with my older guys, just from a life perspective, right? We're slowly going and pushing and just add another 2K, whatever, or add another rep this week. And but for the kids in the hockey group, I'm trying to just get them as strong as possible. And so I don't even have, after jump, jump, throw, sprint, we do, I pair an upper body with a lower body, and maybe a core sometimes, but depending on what I want, what I'm looking for. These guys need a lot of core work. I'm keeping it so simple, and we're starting to pick up. I'm starting to, it's good because they're starting to feel it, and they're starting to make their way. Obviously, it's a semi-private, so I only have 4 guys, and so it's easy to.
And how old are they?
The cheating age, 15 and 16.
Okay, so it's 15, 16 is a little easier because I was thinking, because I actually have, the reason I came up, some of these ideas actually kind of originated from Mark's group, which was mostly 13, 14 at that time. And we were finding, and I talked about this in Functional Strength Coach 7, that 5 pounds was too much for these kids. When you jump and you got a kid who's benching the bar, and then you throw 5 more pounds on, it's 10%, it's more, it's almost 12% of the weight. And the kids would struggle. But if you said, hey, you did 45 for 5, let's do it for 6, let's do it for 7, and then we'll go to 50. We were able to, we just coaxing that progress along. And it's really crazy because, as I've talked about this, probably people, when you talk about being sick of hearing me listen, but you're probably sick about hearing me talk about training middle school kids. But it's been amazing to me what we've been able to do with that slight edge, show up consistently, use these really small increments, a rep here, a 2.5 here. And the progress these kids have made is people come in and watch them now and they're like, this is crazy. You got 14-year-old kids, and it's typical. I got, it's like Mia that I showed in the video. I got 14-year-old girls doing weighted chin-ups. I've got 14-year-old boys like Mark did, I think 30 for 3 the other day. In the chin up, and they deadlifted, a bunch of them deadlifted 250 for 5, on the trap bar. So we're making progress, but we're really not taking very big chunks.
Yeah. You know what? Let's segue that into the pull-up progression. I got 2 of the kids are, they can bang them out pretty much, and so no problem with them. But I've been kind of following your progression of assisted, and then the eccentric, right?
Yep.
And then I do a hold in 2 different positions. So, but let me ask you this though, all right, should I don't want to do this 1 day a week. I feel like that needs to be almost like, I don't know, I don't want to say part of the warm-up, but I should at least do something for those guys in the warm-up, like, hey, guys, go inside, give me 5, assisted, and then give me a hold. You know what I mean? You think, 3 days a week, I feel like that's not going to kill them.
No, and there's some people, if you've ever read Pavel's books, I think that's one of the things he talks about is that idea of doing, 1 pull-up 10 times during the day, that kind of thing. Yeah. And with these kids, and I guess I'm like a broken record, but I think sometimes I get tainted in my mind by, this is the way we've always done it. And I look at it and think, well, we'd never do chin-ups twice a week. We wouldn't do 2 vertical pulls. When the reality is, it's kind of like the thread, the hip dominant, knee dominant exercise thread too. back to the idea of you can break the rules if you know the rules.
Yep.
And if you know why you're breaking the rule, then go ahead and break it. And if you find that breaking the rule is benefiting you, then keep going. If you find that it's not, then stop. And I think that's what happens with that. And so much of it, again, we go back, Devin, I'll say the word intent. It's that intent idea of, when someone, that one chin up, okay, give me that one good chin up. There's a lot of oomph that has to go into that for a kid. And in a way, you're one rep maxing in a pretty safe environment. If the kid can do sets of one, you're not worried about somebody getting hurt. So, and then suddenly next thing you know, that kid can do two. Yeah. And then they can do three. And as I said, the one thing, we were joking about it the other day in the gym, but I watch some days and I'm like, man, I understand that we do this for a living and I understand that we believe in our system, but God, does this work better than sometimes than I think it's supposed to?
Yeah, it's fun for me to see, because I don't get to see this kind of progress with the older guys, I get a lot of, I played 5 rounds in 4 days, I feel great, and that's, satisfying, but to see these kids get stronger and to get messages from their dads about how they're talking about it at dinner is pretty cool, for sure.
I don't think there's no question that it really is like, and to be honest, when you go and watch them play and you see that other people see the difference, I think that's the biggest thing. And that was me. This spring, like I said, our lacrosse kids, which is the group, basically, they all play hockey, but in the spring it was lacrosse. We won the Eastern Mass Championship and we crushed everybody. It wasn't even the final game was 12-3. Yeah. And, we're running by kids that we weren't running by a year ago, and parents notice it. Other kids notice it. And that's why I said sometimes you look and think, wow, if we can just get these kids to be consistent, to show up, to do what we ask them to do, it really is amazing what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I can't wait to go see some of these kids play. The one kid that's the best kid, he was a freshman this year. He led the league, the high school league in scoring. He just does that for fun. But he's a freshman, but he plays in all those, the typical youth teams, the travel teams. But he's like, he's one of those kids. He's a leader, and his dad asked me. He goes, do you want me to get you, I can get you 3 groups, I can get you 4 groups. I'm like, no, I don't really have a gym anymore, so I'm just doing this to train him. And I go, get me 3 more kids, because I need to start making money on this. I'm regretting that I didn't take those other 3 groups, because A, for the money, but B, I'm really enjoying it. So,
be careful, because that's how I started.
Yeah. I'm like, I got to go back in. I might open another gym again. Coach,
but wait. Let somebody else go out of business and buy theirs.
There you go. Exactly. Coach, you mentioned the knee-dominant exercise options for older client with knee pain. I thought this was an important point to bring up. I loved what Lee Taft had said, and it's great to have Lee contributing not only to the content but on the forum right now. Lee was talking about, hey, look, the person, the woman, I forget, it might be Kat Lopez, she was talking about how every knee-dominant exercise hurts that person. So Lee was saying, look, use your hip hinge pattern, with little to no knee bend, and start to reduce the hip hinge and, start to flex the knees a little bit. So little by little, you kind of change it. I think you had kind of made the analogy of like going from, like the trap bar deadlift, right? Like that idea from our old. Yeah. But I like what you said, and I think you were just kind of referencing it. Don't worry about hip dominant versus knee dominant. There are no have-to exercises. If you have to do 4 hip dominant exercises a day, that's fine. I think people, like, same thing with me, like what I would always do with knee people was, hey, let's put some ankle weights on. Let's do some straight leg raises. Let's do some side leg raises. I think Ben Bruno had talked about maybe, getting the mini band out. But I think it's an important point not to worry so much all the time about this hip dominant versus knee dominant. And I have to have this mixture of them.
Yeah, it's like we said, it's the idea of, knowing the rules, breaking the rules. So when you look at, functional anatomy, there's no, it's more like knee emphasis, hip emphasis, really, in the sense that, it's not like you're deadlifting and your quads aren't working. So I think that's part of, again, we categorize things to make program design easier. But then I think what happens is people get very black and white, like, oh, I can't do 3 hip dominant exercises with no knee dominant, I'll produce an imbalance. And you're like, that's probably not true. And you really shouldn't worry about it. And it goes back to like the old, I always refer to Mark Verstegen's nutrition thing in the original Core Performance. Something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And he talked about the analogy of cold pizza. If you have cold pizza for breakfast, that's better than not having breakfast. And I think for somebody saying, okay, we're doing lower body, but all I can do is bridge and straight leg deadlift and some sort of whatever slide board leg curl, it's like, great, you get a pretty good lower body session in. If the other stuff hurts, because the other thing that will happen, is eventually you'll go back to body weight squat, and someone will say, oh, that didn't really hurt, it was okay. Because I've used this term a lot, but some people are suffering from weakness, and because they're so weak, when they try to lower their center of mass in a knee dominant pattern, their knees hurt. But the reality is there's nothing wrong with their knees. What's wrong is that they're just not strong enough, and you get them a little bit stronger, and suddenly you think, okay, this person's tolerating this now. I've been doing rehab that way for 30 years, and it always works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I think I think Ben Bruno finally mentioned this, but I started doing this with a couple of my guys because, I think every single one of my guys has had some issue with knees. I mean, when you're in your 60s or 50s, you definitely have had some kind of history with that. And we talked about this before, but I use the sled as the knee dominant exercise, or at least something to work those legs.
Yeah.
And obviously if it hurts, and Ben Bruno was talking about doing sled pulls, right, going backwards with it.
Yeah.
But the doctor was like, don't do that, whatever. And he doesn't, he's, like he said, he didn't want to fight the doctor. But I think, using the sled, too, it's another thing to find some of these things. Honestly, even a bike, like saying, oh, well, does the bike hurt? No, it doesn't hurt. Cool. Let's use that here right now. Maybe we can get something out of it.
Right. I mean, I did that the other day. I had a kid who had a sore hip flexor, and we were supposed to be doing sled sprints. I'm like, okay, just get on the bike and bike sprint. So we're going to get something fast. And because the one thing is, I love the bike. Like with the assault bike, I had this discussion with an NHL strength coach during the season. He's like, I'm having a guy's really struggling with leg work. I'm like, have you tried bike sprints? He's like, I hadn't even thought about it. And I said, well, what do you feel like if you do a really hard bike workout, you get off? What do you feel like? Oh, I feel like my quads are going to explode. I'm like, exactly. So do it. And it's, and I think, and that's part of the problem. And that's where Kat Lopez had said, I love the forum, I love listening, because you realize that you're learning and you're thinking and you are going through this process of, okay, I learned all the rules. Now I'm understanding why at certain times I might need to break that rule. So I think, and again, broken record, right? It's the beauty of the forum. The forum is amazing. That the people that show up on a day-to-day basis, like Lee or like Tim Bagan or like Alwyn Cosgrove or like Charlie, and just drop a little gem in there for somebody. And you look at that and think, for $15 a month, I'm going to get consulting from all of these crazy who's who of people in the industry who are just sort of stopping by at some point during the day and reading my thread and giving me a little tip. It amazes me. Yeah,
it's pretty cool, I gotta say. Good stuff. All right, Coach, it's been a good one, so I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, and we will talk to you next week.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, right now at Perform Better, they have free shipping on orders over $59. Guys, make sure you check out some of the other sale items as well. You can double dip with that. Get some great deals. All right, special financing. Remember, Perform Better has 0 interest for 36 months, no down payment, and no payment for 6 months. Pretty crazy. Got to check that out, especially if you want to open a gym or if you are redoing upgrading some of the equipment in your gym. Don't forget, it's summit season. Come see me in Providence. The summit there is August 1st to the 4th. You can check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Hey, this is Eric DeGatti here with the Functional Movement System segment on the Strength Coach podcast. Today, what we're going to talk about is the top 5 myths and misconceptions about the functional movement screen and the functional movement system. When people ask me about the movement screen or have questions about the movement screen or even want to contend the validity of the movement screen, most of the times what I find defending is not what the screen actually is or was ever intended to do. And so because of that, I want to dispel some of the great myths and misconceptions out there about the movement screen. The first and probably biggest one is the misconception about the value of the total score, meaning that if we have 7 tests and the scores go from 0 to 3 for each test, well, a perfect score would be a 21. And so everybody thinks 21 is the goal. It's actually not. I can't show you that you're going to be that much better in terms of performance, or you're going to be that much more resilient to injury or lower your risk of injury being a 3 versus a 2. So we're not looking to necessarily get you to a 21. So that's the first misconception on total score. The second comes from a lot of our research that showed that people with scores of 14 or less showed a much higher risk for injury. Now, total scores may work great as a cut point for research, and it may work great for large groups when I work with large teams to try to create cut points of who needs to be addressed versus who doesn't. But ultimately, we don't know how you got to that 14. If you were a 14 that is all 2s, I'm not concerned at all with you. I'm more concerned with someone who's a 17 with a 1 or a 0 in their score. So the total score really doesn't tell me anything when it comes to writing an individual program. The second piece is something I mentioned earlier, that 3 is the goal. 3 is not always the goal, except for certain and specific cases. In the cases of where I've worked with some of the top ballroom dancers in the world, where they are gauged and judged specifically and subjectively on their movement, we might try to get them a little higher on their movement score than I might another individual. What we found is in the NFL that a 3 in the inline lunge is a more desirable predictive score that we want to look for because there's so much deceleration and cutting involved. But those are very specific situations. 3 is not the goal for everyone. And sometimes I don't even want someone to be a 3, as in the case of, say, an NFL linebacker whose main point of contact is their shoulders. Well, you better have some big honking shoulders if you're going to sustain those type of violent collisions. And so because of that, if you're really built in your upper body, it's really going to be tough for you to reach your hands around that shoulder complex and to be able to get your hands that close together. And so if you can get your hands to a 3, you might actually create some hypermobility, which is going to be a death sentence the first time you make your first arm tackle. So that may not be the goal for that population. The third myth now, since we're talking about injuries, is that the FMS is an injury prevention tool. Number one, you cannot prevent all injuries because there's so many multiple factors that go into when someone gets hurt, and not all of them are movement related. If you look into the work of Dr. Matthew Walker and what he talks about with sleep, that how reaction times go down with less than 6 hours sleep. So the difference between you cutting and getting it out of the way of a tackler or you being able to react to a fastball coming in, if that is compromised because you don't have enough sleep, well, there's an injury that may happen that had nothing to do with movement whatsoever. The other thing is that with injury, there's just risk factors, and it also depends on what situations that you're in. The risk factors go up higher depending on the demand that we're putting on the structure and the tissues. So there's no way to 100% prevent injuries, and especially the FMS never claimed to be a injury prevention 100% predictor. But what we have found through the research is that people who move poorly tend to break down and don't last. So if I'm going to put the odds in my favor, I'm going to take the people who move poorly, who have the 1s on their movement screen, and I'm going to want to get them addressed. The fourth one is that it is a performance predictor. And this is a big one. When people come to me and say, well, the FMS is not for this sport. It's not for baseball. And I would say, yes, you were 100% right, because it was never intended to be a sport-specific evaluation. If you want a sport-specific evaluation for golf, check out the TPI screen. If you want a sport-specific screen for baseball that is predictive, then it's things like On Base U. The movement screen is looking at baseline movement and seeing, do you have adequate and competent mobility and motor control? That is it. It does not tell me if you're going to be able to have proper pitching mechanics or golf swing. So it is never meant to be a performance predictor. If it was a performance predictor, the average score at the NFL Combine wouldn't be as low as it is. So there are people who can perform very well with a low FMS score. Despite of those dysfunctions, they're able to compensate well enough that they can still do their thing on the field or the court or the track. And so it is not a performance predictor. Last but not least, the big misconception when it comes to training is that it is a pass-fail, and that if you do not do well on any of the tests, that we immediately shut you down and stick you in a corner with a stability ball and some TheraBand and a foam roller, and you do not get to train or participate in your activities. Nothing could be further from the truth. What happens so much is we get caught up in finding a faulty pattern that we forget that even if we have one or two faulty patterns, we still have 5 or 6 patterns that were perfectly fine, that were 2s or higher, that we can still train. And so all we need to do is modify our program so it doesn't counteract or contradict those 1 or 2 faulty patterns. And we can still put together a really good program, whether it be for performance or whether it be for just general fitness, with just working around those 1 or 2 patterns. When it comes to scores, I can tell you that in seeing tens of thousands of screens, that I've only seen probably about a dozen perfect scores ever. But one thing I could tell you that I've never seen is a 0. A 0 would mean you have pain on all 7 screens. And so because of that, even if you scored a 1, that would tell me you have only 1 pattern that is not painful, but it is very, very dysfunctional. Well, that at least gives me something to latch onto, and I can train that pattern. And the more I get that pattern to improve, the other patterns will then fall in line behind it. And so it does not mean shutdown. It simply means modification. And so don't get into the thought process that if you don't get high scores on your FMS, that you will not be able to train. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so what we need to do is learn how to adjust our programming using something like Brett Jones wrote about on the FMS website, using a stoplight system where certain exercises may be a red light given the score that you have in that specific pattern, and that we don't want to do those. But that's only a temporary modification. And if we do our correctives properly, the very exercises we've taken away from you, such as the deadlift with an active straight leg raise, that is the exact pattern we're training you to get back to. And so we don't need to shut you down. We just need to modify. And when we do modify, it is only temporary. This is Eric DeGatti, and this has been the Functional Movement System segment for the Strength Coach Podcast. Thank you for listening.
All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I am here with Alwyn Cosgrove. Alwyn, thanks for coming on again.
Thanks for having me, Ant, and that was a very exciting, jazzy intro right there.
Yeah, I got a little, we pre-record these, so I'm sure everybody knows that, and this is our third one in this one, and I'm just, the coffee's starting to kick in a little bit. It's a second coffee, so there you go. Alwyn, we had a thread on the forum about the amount of space to start out with. And it's funny because Mike, in his latest Functional Strength Coach 7, he was talking about people about, starting out. And he said, don't think Alwyn Cosgrove and Mark Verstegen started out in the facilities that they're in. And he showed a picture of, your original space. He showed Mark Verstegen working with Nomar Garcia-Parra in the supermarket, an empty supermarket across the street. So the bottom line is, wanted to talk to people about, look, you don't need 10,000 square feet to start out with. So I wanted to talk to you about what kind of size you think we should be looking at right away. Like, we're a trainer, we have X amount of clients, and that's another thing that I want to really quickly talk about is, like, how many clients do you think before we can feel like, okay, we can go in on our own? And when we're looking at that space, besides the size, what should we plan for growth? Like, is there other spaces in the building? Is there a basement? Is it going to be hard to move? And is location really that important, or is it really just about parking? So just a lot of questions there, but talk to us about getting that initial space, things we want to look for.
So the biggest thing is, let's start with your model, right? If you're a one-on-one guy who's only going to do one-on-one training, and there's still, I've been very vocal that I think small group and bigger group is a better business model. But if you're a one-on-one guy, obviously you need less space if it's just going to be you and the client. If you plan on having a couple more staff there, then you need a little more space. We opened, the unit was about 1,100 square feet, and about 600 of that was the gym floor, and we were doing one-on-one at the time. And so very quickly I had me, Rachel, and one other trainer. So there's 6 people in this space. You're running out of space because of the coaches standing around, right? I can handle 3 people on my own, and that's kind of part of how the small group model came about, is this realization that you could fit more people, you could train more people at a time. Right now, if you're running the kind of model that is more popular now with small group, maybe multiple coaches, maybe a class going on at the same time, I don't like anybody going in under 1,500 unless you've got lots of room to grow. And I'd really push you towards 3,000 to start with. 3,000, you can make a lot of money without having to grow at all. 1,500, you can make money, it'll be good, but you're going to run out of space, and that puts a cap on your income, right? So that's the part to think about. Now, I will say that our original location, I've been fortunate enough in that I haven't had to move, because I'm in a strip mall, right, in downtown Newhall in California, which is, when we moved in, it was the edge of town, and we've been fortunate enough that that's kind of where town's become hot now, right? All the gastro pubs and boutique stores and stuff, and wine bars are all going in behind us, and there's a hotel coming in, which will be cool. But we've been fortunate enough that the businesses next to us have gone out of business, and I've been able to expand in the same location. But now we're only somewhere around 6,000 square feet, and we can get it done in that space. So I like 1,500 to start with, depending on your model. What you really want to look at, the one thing I don't like about my facility is, because of me expanding, I've got load-bearing walls, so it divides it into little rooms, which makes line of sight hard. I'd like a bigger box, or divide it into 2, right, so I could see the whole gym from one point. Now, in terms of when can you afford it, well, what you have to do is figure out what would the rent be. Now, on the West Coast, they charge monthly, and on the East Coast, they talk about it annually, right? So I'm going to talk about it monthly is $1 to $3 per square foot per month, which will be 12 to 36 if you're on the East Coast, right? And how many clients would you need to cover that, right? And how many clients could you handle? So without getting into here's how much money you need to make, your rent should be no higher than 30% of your costs each month, right? So if it's going to be 3,000, right, that your costs will have to be 9,000 per month, right? Sorry, it has to be 30% of your costs, right? So payroll is the next part, and then everything else miscellaneous above that. So if the rent is 3,000, you're looking at it has to be 9,000 in costs. That's including you getting paid, right? So can you generate over 9,000 in that space? Well, if a client is paying, let's say we choose 10,000 as our target income for that. This is kind of a backwards way to do it, but it hopefully explains to people. If we do 10,000, we need to make 10,000 a month, and we're going to charge 200 a month. We need to get 50 clients in there. Can you get 50 clients, right? If you can get 50 clients, that's good. If you've got 25 right now, you're probably ready to go. Right, you can hit that, right? But that's the idea, is that I read this a long time ago, or I saw it on TV, and it was John Lennon was interviewed, or Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles, and they said, what I'm going to do this weekend is I'm going to write myself a swimming pool. And everybody kind of joked, but what he was really referring to is he knew that if he wanted a swimming pool, it was X number of dollars, and his skill is to write songs, and he could write a song that with his percentage of the money made, he was going to buy a swimming pool. And that's how you think about it in terms of rent. It's not what you can afford, it's how many clients would that be, right? So if we're looking at a $3,000 rent for a space and you're charging $200 a month, then obviously you need 15 clients to cover just the rent to break even, right? If you're less than that, you're not ready yet, right? So that's the basic idea. So you start small, look at your workout style. I'll always talk about workout flow. If you always start with stretching, then where do these people stretch? Where do they do their dynamic warm-up? Where do they do their movement? Where do they go to do core? Can you make your gym flow so that every 15 minutes, 3 people could arrive and they don't disrupt the flow? And if you can get that in your space, then you've got something pretty cool. But it starts with if you're a boot camp style where you want to see 20 people an hour, you're going to need a little more space than someone who's doing a one-on-one training.
Let me ask you really quick, though. You mentioned the lines of sight and you mentioned your space. Now, I'm thinking the opposite. I like the way your space is because I feel like they walk in and, on the left-hand side, right after the front desk is that warm-up area. So it's kind of like, and then, then there's then they come around the corner and there's some other things and there's the weight room, right? And then the other room is the group fitness room that's kind of separated. I think that is beneficial. And I think it also, for newer people, it kind of brings it down a notch instead of saying like, oh my God, I'm in this huge gym, even if that's same space that's wide open and everybody can see me right now. I feel like for newer people, it's kind of nice to walk into your place and know
there's definitely some strengths to it because I can divide the room up and I can do different activities, but now I need more staff because I can't see somebody in the back corner, right? And that's the idea is I would never have one big box, right? I would still divide things up, but I had to divide it up not by my choice, right? That's all I'm saying. So the idea of the warm-up room being completely separate, and this is something that I'll teach is my heavy dumbbells are at the back of the gym. Our heavy squat rack is at the back of the gym. So a new member comes in, they don't see any of that stuff, which is the intimidating stuff at some level, right? Yeah. But and it allows me to do that workout flow I was talking about because people move to really the next room, right, as they come around the gym, and then they finish, as we talked about a few episodes ago, they'll do an entire loop of the gym, and they finish back at the front desk where our smoothie bar is to get their post-workout shake.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. All right, Alwyn, well, thanks for doing this. Lots to think about when you're thinking about going out on your own and getting a space. So thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.
Cheers, Ant. And for you listening, guys, please come and check us out, resultsfitnessuniversity.com or Facebook, Instagram, same name.
Hey, this is Adam.
And this is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Hook Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Oh, yeah.
So today, Tim, I think there's an interesting topic, and that is flexible programming.
Oh, that's interesting. We actually get a lot of calls, especially from folks in the private sector, Gen Pop, talking about, how they can schedule training using Train Heroic, how they can schedule it flexibly. Yeah.
So let's start in the other direction. And there is some evidence that flexible templates, flexible programming can be as good as, or maybe in some cases slightly better than, just sticking to a flex schedule.
Okay.
And so, I'm aware of a couple studies. It hasn't been it's not like there's a huge body of evidence on it.
Right.
But some of it makes sense. And, for example, one study on high-level bodybuilders, I think, they still had fixed training days.
Sure.
But they were allowed to pick from a roster of exercises, essentially.
Okay, gotcha.
And so instead of, for example, being forced to do bench press, they could substitute flies or something for their chest.
Got it.
And so at the end of this, those who were on that flexible plan did slightly better.
Oh, interesting.
And, the authors basically concluded, it seemed to be in these people who are ready to be that level of autonomous,
sure,
right? They also self-policed because they didn't do the same thing all the time because they knew they shouldn't, right?
Right.
And that level of autonomy let them kind of do the thing that they felt best on a given day, and then they pushed themselves harder on. So you would expect to get some better results perhaps out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this question came up a bunch. That's really cool and interesting too. I think coaches and trainers, they, looking, like I said, usually in that private sector, they want to cater to those those folks they're training because those folks are paying them money. But in my belief, coming from a team sector, right, a collegiate athletic sector, is there should be some type of accountability there, or expectation that folks are going to show up on a particular day. Like you said, the amount of autonomy a coach would give in flexible programming might not be, 3 days a week, come in and get it done whenever you want. Rather, we're going to do this Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you can pick what you're doing on those days within reason, right? And that gives those people a sense of autonomy, which we've talked about before, right? The sense of choice, kind of, hastens goal attainment, things like that. But I didn't really come from a background like that because we were super structured. Every day I knew exactly who I was going to have at what time, and I'm driving accountability in those athletes because that's part of my job as well. But we did the same thing, some auto-regulatory stuff during sessions, or give the kids some options to feel autonomous. But if you're scheduled Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're lifting Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Right. So we're talking an appropriate level of autonomy.
Correct.
Right? And so, I've coached a lot of the kind of Gen Pop folks who are definitely, often more health conscious than performance oriented.
Sure.
And I just don't know who it would work for, to be honest. Among most people, right? It takes a high level of knowledge and experience to be able to actually run this is totally arbitrary program over a long period of time and succeed. Who here, listening, and you and I, Tim, hasn't been on T Nation or whatever
bodybuilding
in the past and gotten some program that sounded great. I'm gonna run Magort deadlift because I'm that good of a deadlifter. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And then halfway through, you're this is feeling weird, and I missed a day. Yeah. And I'm not making the progress I thought I would.
Where do I go now?
Do I start over?
Yeah. Exactly right. And I kind of brought this example up this morning, and it was, there's 2 points. If you take a piece of paper, draw a point A on the left-hand side and a point B on the right-hand side, draw a little squiggly line in between, that's where the magic happens, right? So you just simply saying, hey, here's a program, 3 days a week, figure it out. You're not really coaching at that point. You're just kind of providing a template and letting that person run with it. But the magic happens between A and B, not on either end.
Yeah, and so maybe I don't want to step on anybody's toes because I'm not telling people to run their business in terms of maybe you sold somebody a program. Maybe that's appropriate for that person.
Sure.
But I think a lot of the questions we get are basically getting at the fact that I gave somebody a program, and what happens then is they get off track, and then they don't know what to do next because they've missed a few sessions. They kind of need a user's manual for that program at that point. Totally. They need some upfront instruction about if this then that. And, I don't know what the answer is if they miss a week or 10 days about where they should go because I don't know who they are or where they are in your program or what your program is. Right. There's just and this is why, when I coach people these days, it's really based on a week over week kind of iteration and follow up.
Yeah.
Because I don't let people get that far off track.
Sure.
And I also don't plan that far ahead from Gen Pop people because there's not a deadline.
Right.
And so I just kind of keep them on track and keep them doing something that seems to be working until it's time to switch.
Sure. Yeah. And I think key here, and you just kind of touched on it, is keeping those lines of communication open, right? We need to establish accountability and expectations at the beginning, and we have to continually follow up between point A and B over and over again to make sure if we need to make adjustments, we totally can.
For sure. That's going to do it for us today. Go to trainhook.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now it's time for the BodyByBoyleOnline.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle's Strength and Conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. I am back with my good friend and one of my first fitness mentors, Geralyn Coopersmith. This is going to be part 2. We're talking about her lecture that she did in Orlando, Fitness Career Transformation, the 4 A's of propelling yourself from where you are to where you want to be. First of all, Geralyn, thanks for coming back and doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we talked about awareness and we talked about attitude. So I will remind everybody, if you didn't hear the first part, you have to go back because it sets everything up for what we're going to be talking about now. So, Coop, we are on my favorite part. Action. Yes. This is where it is. This is where it's all happening. But you can't get to action unless you go over the first parts, though. But so let's go over action.
Yeah. So action. And to your point, you can't get to this until you do those other parts. And there's a lot of research to suggest that people who are type A's who want to just get to it, get to the meat of it and jump right in, want to skip those first two parts, this idea of awareness and attitude. They want to just, what do I need to do? But without those first two pieces in place, it is very hard to set yourself up for success, because you're going to create internal roadblocks to moving forward and actually taking the action that you need to take. So action is, that's where the rubber meets the road. You could talk all this stuff, you could have great attitude about it, but if you don't take action, nothing's going to change. And it's action in the service of making you a better version of yourself. I think for a long time I used to think about it as just action just to get things forward and move the needle. And yes, hopefully it does that. But even if you fail at whatever, quote unquote, fail at whatever the goal is that you're trying to achieve, you will end up a better version of yourself for having committed to the process and taken steps to change yourself in the way that you need to evolve to become that awesome person who's achieving the dreams that you have for your life. And a lot of that is a function of our habits. We're a collection of our habits. Dr. Joe Dispenza, I like his work a lot. He just talks about this idea that we all have our thoughts of who we are and that we're stuck. This is my personality. The thing is, your personality is something that evolves over time and something that you can choose to a large extent. It's what we think of as our fixed personality is a collection of our habits, our mental thought habits, our behavioral habits, and we do have the ability to use our prefrontal cortex and make different habits that support us in a better way. The thing with habits, though, is that they are habitual, that they are on this autopilot. They actually exist in a more primitive part of the brain, in the basal ganglia, in the lizard brain that we have, in the limbic system, and they are going on without our awareness. And it's a good evolutionary adaptation because you don't want to have to think about, this is me brushing my teeth, this is me driving to work. I mean, those things are on autopilot, so that's good. But when it's things that are holding you back, not so much. So there's this idea that comes from another great book. Charles Duhigg wrote The Power of Habit, such a good read. And he talks about this idea of a habit loop. Something in the environment sets you off and cues you to go into your habit. You're usually not aware of it. That's happening at a subconscious level. You go into this routine without maybe thinking about it, probably, and then you have some kind of reward. And he said the research suggests that you can't change the cue. The cue's in the environment. It's going to happen. What you need to work on is changing the routine and the reward to make a better routine that supports what you want to do and a reward that's healthier and moving you toward where you want to be. And it's interesting that there's actually brain research. They can see a habit formed in the brain as a structure when they do brain scans, and that represented habit in your brain doesn't go away. It just sort of lies dormant. So that's why habits are so hard to break. Mm-hmm. But if you can fill in a more adaptive habit so that your behavior's changing, then you have a chance of making things better. And I used the example in the presentation of years ago, I smoked cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes in the end of high school and my freshman year of college. And I wanted to stop smoking. And it was really hard for me. I wasn't even smoking that much. But the one cigarette that was hard for me to give up was the end of the day cigarette. I'd have dinner. We had ate in the cafeteria. I was a freshman. It was back in the days where you could smoke everywhere, including on planes. Yeah. A million years ago. Seems like. And smoking a cigarette after dinner was the one cigarette I couldn't give up. And so I had to figure out, the cue was being there in that space at that time of day. I wanted a cigarette so badly. But I got a bag of lollipops, and that's what I did. So instead of lighting a cigarette, I had a lollipop at the end of the day. It was something to do that sort of kind of filled the bill of what you would do with a cigarette and wasn't as unhealthy for me as smoking. And eventually I was able to quit smoking. But had I not substituted something for something else, innately I kind of knew I had to do that. That's the way you deal with habits, bad habits that you want to break.
It's interesting. I remember like when I turned 50, I did this little 50 for 50 thing. and trying to like see, what can I get down every day, and what can I get my body fat down percentage wise at 50 years old without. I still wanted to have like a glass of wine every night, but I noticed like when I was going to hockey games. Like I always associate hockey games like got to get the food there and you got to have a couple drinks and like we're gonna pregame and like, but I didn't need to do that. But there was all these associations, with those actions, right? With all these different like that glass. So I'm gonna relax with a glass of wine. Is wine really relaxing you? I don't know. I
Totally.
Totally does, but yeah, it really didn't. I mean, like if you really thought about it, there's other things that you can do. Like you said, you replace them. I do want to mention James Clear's Atomic Habits because he kind of goes over similar things. Like he does mention Duhigg's book, and they go over some of the things, like almost expanding on what Duhigg talked about in Power of Habit, and he goes into even deeper. Routines and just things that you can do. It really is fascinating. And I think that's kind of with this idea about action and it's taking action, going back to what you had said earlier. It's not, there's a certain point when we do say like, yeah, ready, fire, aim. It's great. But the problem with that is when you keep doing that too much, there's no organization, you do end up drifting and you do end up in a place where you're like, wait, where am I going with all this? And that's why it's important to do what we were talking about earlier with the dinner party test and like writing these things down and thinking about them, thinking about your thinking like you were talking about. It's really so true that there does need to be this element in there.
Yeah, 100%. And to the point you made, like we talked a lot about not all the things that we wanted to change move the needle equally. Sometimes it's one thing that moves the needle 10 times more than anything else. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed in trying to figure out what to do next because we're like, I got to change everything. It's like, maybe you don't. I'm listening to the one thing now because you recommended it and I'm loving it. It's saying the same thing. That just not everything changes things. There's probably one or two things that you're doing now that if you stop doing them or start doing them are going to change things infinitely more. It's that Pareto principle, like 20% of your actions are responsible for 80% of your results kind of thing.
But we never want to stop, right? We never really want to stop and think about like, wait a minute, let me step back for a second and find out. Because like in the one thing, it's like, what's that one thing that'll move the needle the most, right? That'll make other things irrelevant or unnecessary. But we're so busy, caught up in the whirlwind, right? That we don't want us to stop because we were afraid to stop because we won't be busy. And then, but like if you have to stop and think about like, wait a minute, what is moving the needle the most?
Yeah. We have such a resistance to stopping and thinking, and I'll mention a little bit about goal setting because that's a big part of action. But a lot of times, I know for years I was like, I need to set some goals, and in my head it was like, I need a perfectly quiet Saturday with my perfect notebook, with my perfect pen. The dogs better not need anything. Logan better not need. Evan better. Like I had a whole laundry list that day is never going to come. I can tell you, and yet my resistance was really just like, it doesn't have to be perfect. You have 15 minutes. Sit down. Like done is better than perfect. Start moving towards something rather than having all this resistance and all this BS excuses on why you can't do it. It's not true. Just do it. It's not going to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll never be perfect. But I do want to mention, because I love done is better than perfect. It's not the same as ready, fire, aim. Done is better than perfect there is more thought into it. And just get it done. You don't have to plan everything, but it is good to, think about what you're doing. Think about some of these things like the long-term dream and the 10-year and the 3 to 5 year and the 1 year and kind of like the one thing, reverse engineer all of this to what's the thing that you can do that's going to move the needle the most.
Totally.
And there's a lot of science behind that with happiness. I loved Dan John actually in my book interview had quoted like his idea about success, and he had quoted Earl Nightingale, and it was basically the progressive realization of a worthy ideal, and it's exactly what you're talking about, like just moving forward. There's a lot of science behind this idea that this almost like let's put it to the strength coaches, the legacy book, the Kiwi Kaizen, right? Like 1% better every day. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. Just every day getting better, moving that needle. Like I think, when you were talking about in your interview for my book, it was this idea of, I'm always trying to find out how I can be better. I'm always doing something like, what can I read? What can I do in the car, listen to in the car, in my commute? So, like what can I read on the plane instead of just staring at, the TV on the plane or whatever.
Totally.
Good stuff. Coop, let's go move on to this idea, though, about action and habits. I just want to go a little bit deeper. You talk about Keystone Habits in there. Can you go over that?
Yeah, so this is that idea that not everything moves the needle the same. And I use the example in my own life, kind of similar to you. Like if I'm trying to get my body fat down and lose weight, I have to really think about my drinking. And it's just that one glass of wine. If it's just one, it's fine. If it becomes two, then my portion sizes don't seem to matter as much, and dessert seems like a great idea, and maybe a second, third, and fourth glass of wine seem like a really good idea. And then you're just like, what just happened? So for me, I know when I'm trying to be really conscious, it's like, okay, you're going to have this 1 5-ounce glass of wine. You're going to enjoy it, and then the story's over. That's it. And if I do that, it becomes much easier to stick to the rest of my nutrition plan and be focused. But that's the one thing in that particular scenario that moves the needle infinitely more than others. And I think we all see this as fitness professionals with our clients. A lot of times people will start training with us and have results, and when they get more fit, they automatically start eating a little better because they realize, hey, I just worked out really hard today. I don't want to trash my workout. I'm not going to go eat that burger and fries, every single night now. I'm going to make some choices that support what I'm doing. So I think for all of us, there's something in there that we really have to get clear on that's either the impediment or the unlock to getting where we need to go, and just propels us there that much faster.
Absolutely. So, we talked about awareness and attitude in the first part of this interview, and now we talked about action. And the funny thing is, and it's funny because we were talking about this when we recorded everything, a lot of times I'm like, this is such an important piece because there's so much of this really does go together. And that's where I'm going to talk about next in your fourth A, and that's accountability and staying the course. And it really is such an important piece because, we did all these things to kind of put all this on paper and get there and to think about it and to move the needle forward a little bit. But it is like a roller coaster, and like we have to stay the course and we need help sometimes. So talk about this piece, this last A, accountability.
Yeah, accountability. It was interesting for me in all the research that I did for this. I've been working on this since October of last fall and reading so much about in this particular area. And the thing that came very clear to me is I always thought of accountability as something that you did with other people, like I'm going to be accountable to this coach, which makes sense given our profession. But it's really more about accountability to yourself. Because at the end of the day, if you aren't accountable to yourself, even if nobody else knows that, you know that. And it eats away at your self-confidence because you're like, that's part, I think, for many people, part of the imposter syndrome, when, Sheryl Sandberg talks about it a lot in Lean In, this idea that, everyone has this element of thinking a little bit that they're kind of full of it and kind of a fake. But if you're constantly BSing yourself and you're constantly not being accountable to yourself for the things you said you were going to do, at some point you really don't trust yourself and you don't respect yourself. So it's that constantly being accountable, but also tempering that with realistic expectations that nobody's perfect and that perfection's not the goal. Progress is the goal. And the flip side of all that is that we start beating ourselves up because we weren't perfect. And then it's like, screw it, I'm so messed up, I can't even do this. I'm letting this go. It was, I guess, the 12-week year where Lennington and Moran talk about this idea that good, when they look at their clients, they work with companies all over the world, I think, and when they look at what companies need to accomplish to be considered good and meet most of their goals, it's like 65% of the things they said they were going to do. So it's not, in our perfectionist mind, it's 99.9%, and maybe that's not good enough. It's like 65% or better, you're good. And they said 85%, you are killing it. So you have like 15% fudge factor built in for excellent, and 35% fudge factor built in for like really good. So we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be better than like you said, 1% better every single day, which is not that much, and not beat ourselves up so much when we get off track. There is a natural thing that they talk about in, I think it was the 12-week year as well, this emotional cycle of change, this idea that we all start with like, woohoo, I got this, it's going to be awesome, can't wait. And then reality hits and you're like, oh, wow, this is unpleasant and difficult and not always fun, and kind of the shine's worn off and I'm not sure about this. And if you can stay that course and start to get into a place where you're being optimistic, but an informed optimism, where you're like, okay, I know this isn't perfect. I know it's not always fun, but I'm committed to this process. That's the work of the work. That's what you need to do to stay with it, to be able to achieve things, because it's very easy to lose your enthusiasm for it when the going gets rough and things are not perfect, which they're never going to be. The piece of it, though, with the accountability is you have to have some KPIs, key performance indicators, that you're looking to say whether or not you're doing what you said you were going to do. Because other than that, it's very easy to find all kinds of self-justifications for why we didn't do it, or even say that we did do it. And if you have numbers that you're looking toward, if you said you're going to work out 6 days a week and you worked out 3, okay, you're 50% of what you said you were going to do. Can we get you to 65%? It's a much easier conversation to have with yourself than I think I did it, or did I do it? And I think we're reluctant sometimes in the way we're reluctant to make plans and commit to moving in a general direction. I think we're also reluctant to make serious, decisions about what those KPIs are. You can always change them, but put a line in the sand. At least commit to something, because then you know if you're hitting it or if you're way off the mark. And if you're way off the mark, then maybe you need to rethink that approach. Maybe it's just too much of a reach for your first pass at this, whatever this is.
And it speaks to what you spoke about earlier, and that was this idea of awareness and knowing your strengths and knowing where you can be, and then finding out where do I want to be, and then learning, figuring that out, and then that's when you can start to get realistic KPIs, right? I mean, you could you know where you want to be when you start to reverse engineer that. Now you can figure those out. So this it's not alone. It's not standing alone you have to have accountability to yourself. It really is part of this whole system. And I think, too, just so everybody knows, you're not saying don't have other people to be accountable to, right? I mean, it starts.
Them. That's the second part of it.
Yes.
You definitely need those other people to have that. I think we think of that first. We don't necessarily think of the accountability to ourselves, but the accountability to others. We'll do so much more for others oftentimes than we will do for ourselves. Knowing that you're going to let someone down that you respect. Knowing that, if you commit to going to work out with somebody and they're at the gym waiting for you, you're a lot less likely to blow it off and be like, nah, I'm not going today. Because so-and-so's there waiting for you, and you're going to look like a jerk that didn't show up for your workout. So there's a part of that. And then there's also the social support thing. There's a reason why AA and Weight Watchers, WW, those things work, because there is this community piece to it. So it's not just someone holding you accountable. It's also someone supporting you and saying, hey, I know what it feels like. I'm going through it with you. All of those pieces, having that human connection and knowing that the stuff you're going through is not unique to you. I mean, you're having a slightly different experience than other people, but the overarching themes are human themes. A lot of people are feeling the exact same thing. So you're certainly not alone in your struggle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for me, what I've kind of noticed over the last couple of years and really kind of having accountability partners is there is different levels. Like you said, I love the saying, the more you pay attention. So it's good to have like the coaching group, and that's what you and I are doing, Frank, and like we have people go through this online course, and then we get on the phone with them once a week, and we kind of hold them accountable, and we kind of work through those obstacles. But there's that piece of it. But then there's also, I always recommend, like, have a friend or a colleague who at least you can call because they know you, or similar to what you had talked about in the first part of this episode was, or the last episode was, sending out that questionnaire to your friends, right? And then to your colleagues and to maybe some family members to get those different points of view. So you have the outside view and the people that are going to kick you in the butt from the perspective of, they're like people like us that have been through this and you're paying for it. But then there's also the piece of the friends or the colleagues that can kind of keep you on track, and they'll have a different point of view as well. So there is a couple pieces. There's yourself, then there's the friends that you can have, and then there's the people that you're paying and the coaching. And like, look, we're all coaches. We all ask people to pay us for our fitness advice. We believe in this concept, but then when it comes to ourself and getting better, we don't always hire those coaches that we really need.
Totally. And sometimes we deprioritize that because there's other things that are more important, and you really need to take a look at that. Are there other things that are more important than moving your life forward and having the most fulfillment you can in the time that you have here on this planet? I mean, that's pretty heavy, powerful stuff. I think that's exactly where we should be putting our resources,
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to the idea really quick of the emotional cycle of change, and it's just really me getting a segue into why it's so important to understand your whys, because in that you get into what you had said in your lecture was the valley of despair, and a lot of times one of the strategies is to talk about have those whys, have them accessible, have them for my book, I had to write out my whys and put them near my computer because I absolutely hated doing the editing piece of the book, right? It was horrible. I literally was like, I just don't want to go in and do it today. I hate it. It's not what, but I had to remember, it's going to help a lot of people. It's going to help my brand. It's going to help me make some money. It's going to be cool to have a book. Like, those were all the whys that I reminded myself of when I was in that valley of despair. Can you just kind of go over a little bit of that piece of it?
Yeah, that is a good indicator that you found the why. Because if you get into that place where you've passed the uninformed optimism, which is that first, this is going to be so easy, into what they call informed pessimism, where you're like, wow, this is not what I thought. Then you go into this place, valley of despair. If you have the strong enough, if you've really identified the thing that you truly want, that lights you up inside, and you understand why you want it, what it is about that really affects you in a profound way, then it's going to be infinitely easier to dust yourself off. If you're kind of meh about it when you're in that place, you probably didn't pick the right thing, and you need to gut check whether or not you're being influenced by, people around me think I should be thinking this or doing this. You might be not totally honest with yourself about what you really want. So I think that, once you're in there and you've gotten that is, to your point, that's your why. That's at the end of the day, and you probably, this because you've done a lot of this work, you distill it down into one basic concept. Like, I think for you, and I won't speak for you, but I think for you, it's, you really want to help fitness professionals grow and evolve and thrive. So yes, all those other things are things to remind yourself about that, but the core why, it's just like, this is who you are, and this is the legacy you're trying to leave. That's what gets you out of that place of like, why am I doing this? Oh, here's why you're doing this, because this is who you want to be. This is what you believe. This is a legacy you're trying to leave behind. Without that, and if you haven't really identified that or gotten clear on that, it is hard to get out of those places where you're just like, oh, forget it. It's just too much. I'm not editing this stupid book. I'm over it in a big way. Yeah,
so true.
Yeah.
I want to finish up and we're not really close to finishing yet, but two pieces. And the first piece is nobody gets there alone, because what I found in my, doing the book was, one of the things that everybody talked about was when times get tough, they do lean on the relationships. And also those relationships, a lot of not all the relationships, but family relationships, that they go back to their family and their friends. But the relationships was how they got. They achieved success was by networking, by engaging, by keeping up with, going to workshops and not just sitting in the back and not talking to anybody. And it was such an important piece. I even have in my lecture at Perform Better coming up, I have a TED Talk. I put a piece of it. Having like really quality relationships was so important that in the studies that they did, I think it was Susan Pinker in her TED Talk, and I play this TED Talk, was it was number 1 and 2. Having quality relationships was like the number 1 factor for having a longer life. It was ahead of quitting smoking. It was ahead of exercise. It was incredible that, all of these things that we think of, and they're still important. Don't get me wrong, blood pressure and all that stuff. But it was having these really quality relationships. What did you find out in all of your research with this idea? Because you had a slide, nobody gets there alone.
Yeah, it's the same thing, that nobody gets there alone, and that's a couple of things. One is that I think a lot of us, especially those of us in the helping professions, have a hard time asking for help. We are the helpers, and we think that we don't get to ask for help. And I know for me that's really, really hard. And the other thing about asking for help is that you have to show vulnerability, and you have to be willing to let people in, and that's scary and uncomfortable, and you have to show, like warts and all, like where you're not where you want to be, and you have to be honest with people, and that's really tough to do. And to say to people, hey, I need help. You're not asking them to solve your problems, but people that you trust who will give you honest feedback or support, you need to be willing to have those difficult conversations and leverage those relationships. And to your point about, that saying your network is your net worth, that is so true. I mean, that in my own life, every job I've had has been because it was 1 degree or 2 degrees of separation from the person that was hiring that person. So somebody I knew somebody and recommended me for the opportunity. Virtually none of it was, let's see what's in the want ads. I mean, not that there even are want ads anymore, but let's see what's on Indeed or, whatever people are doing. It's really those connections. So on a practical level, it's relationships that move you along. On a personal level, it's these relationships that support you and help you grow. And to your point about, one of the most fundamental things about humans is that we are social creatures. And when we are not with the tribe, when we are isolated, that causes all kinds of health problems, causes all kinds of psychological problems. Sometimes just knowing that there's someone out there for you. Again, this is why programs like Weight Watchers and AA work, because knowing that somebody's experienced your struggle, feels your pain, you're not alone. That alone has a transformative effect, separate and apart from anything else. So we just can't leave people out of the equation. We can't think we have to kind of soldier on and do this on our own. We need partners in this. We need support systems, and we need to be willing to ask for help from people who can help us and bring us forward. And people are usually really willing to help in ways that we wouldn't even expect.
Absolutely. It's so true. It's funny how, like we're the ones who are always don't want to ask for help. We're the helpers. I really never thought about it that way. It's so true. I want to finish up with just something that I finish up with in my my lecture, and that's with the impact that you have. And I think, I wanted to ask you about this because you've been so close to trainers and you've been in this business for so long and you understand, the evolution of what like a personal trainer has become and what it was and what the perception of it is. And I think that can be a big problem too with people like nobody wants to call themselves just a personal trainer, right? Because it doesn't have, but what I found, especially in my own career, was until I realized that the impact that I was having on some people, and my client Ann Silver, and this is who I bring up in my lecture as well, is I didn't always realize that the impact that I had on her, and really what that impact does to the family, right? So you're working with somebody, and you're working with them, but they're a better person, they're healthier, they live longer, and they're affecting their kids and their friends. If they look better, people are like, hey, what are you doing? And they might get some other people to start working out, and that it's that ripple effect. I just want you to talk about what you've seen with this business in terms of being a personal trainer or people not wanting to say, there's that negative self-talk about, I'm just a trainer, Talk to me about that and what you've seen, because I really believe that until you start to feel good about what you're doing and understand the impact that you're having, and I bring up this story about the janitor at what is now the Kennedy Space Center, was in NASA, and President Kennedy, was taking a tour in the 60s of this space center of NASA, and he said to a janitor, he said, hey, what is it that you do here? I'm John Kennedy. I'm taking a tour. What is it that you do here? He's like, sir, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. And I love that idea of that mindset that, he's mopping the floors and cleaning up, but he's saying, I am helping. I'm part of this process, no matter how big or small, that role might be. He's part of the process to help put a man on the moon. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. Talk to us about that perception and where it's gone and this idea about people understanding the impact that they're having.
Yeah, I do think a lot of fitness professionals, and I prefer sometimes the term fitness professional because it's more holistic and it means other things we can do beyond just the sessions. But to your point, the sessions are day-to-day work that sometimes might feel mundane. It's fundamentally, it's not an overstatement to say that we're changing people's lives. I don't know how many professions can say that. Maybe you're changing lives for the negative in some professions, but there aren't that many professions where we're changing people's lives in a measurable way on the daily. I mean, that's kind of remarkable. And I always say that the reason I love fitness professionals so much is the kind of person that would get into this field is not someone like wakes up in the morning and says, how can I exploit people and make a lot of money doing it? If that's your goal, you're in the wrong job. It's not what happens here. You may or may not make a lot of money. I think it's certainly possible to make, and I've been very fortunate to do well, but that's not necessarily always the case, but there's tremendous value in what we do, and we're really changing lives in ways we don't fully appreciate. Your story about Anne, for sure. I mean, I had clients over the years. One of my clients, I remember when she told me she was getting married, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. And then we were talking, and then I said, so who are your bridesmaids? And she said, well, she's telling me, and she goes, and you. And I looked at her. I was like 10 years, 15 years older than the oldest bridesmaid. It was like, one of these people doesn't belong here. But it was just, I was like taken aback. I was like, Debbie, why am I a bridesmaid? No offense, but I'm touched. But I was trying to talk her out of it almost. And she's like, Geralyn, you changed my life. She's like, I used to, she had a lot of problems with her posture, and she was in a lot of chronic pain. And I just took for granted, like I was just doing my job, like training her and trying to get her better. And for her, like I was one of the most important people in her life to the extent that she wanted me to be at that moment in her life. I mean, you were spoke at Anne's funeral. I mean, that speaks to the place we have in people's lives. Two of my clients, I was the first person to find out that they were pregnant. They let me know. Both of them actually took the pregnancy test in the bathrooms of the gym and came out with the pee stick and waving it in my face, like look. So there's just, you're part of amazing things. All the life events. It's very hard to work with people 1, 2, 3 days a week through all their stuff, the human stuff that we go through, and seeing them at their most vulnerable when they're working and struggling physically and sometimes mentally. It's hard to have those ongoing relationships and not become very connected to people. So I'm in touch with pretty much all of the clients I've had over the years. And I still think of them as part of my family because we've had these transformative experiences that affected me, quite frankly, just as much as they affected them.
Absolutely, yeah. It is true. Like when I spoke at Anne's funeral, there was a moment of, geez, I'm like, here I am at this prominent woman's memorial service, and they're asking the personal trainer to speak, and it did, change. And I had already changed my mind because because of them, and I realized the impact. But I wish I realized it sooner, and that's one of my missions, is to kind of keep reminding trainers and strength coaches that, you know, you are making a huge impact, and that you need to just kind of look around you and think about it, and remember that, because you're doing some great things. And I will say that about you, Geralyn Coopersmith. You have made a huge impact. I said this to you in 2004. You're going to change this industry single-handedly, and you've made such a huge impact on people, and that's why I'm pretty excited about some of the things that we're doing together to kind of help trainers moving forward with our coaching program. So thanks so much for coming on today and talking about the 4 A's, the awareness, the attitude, action, and accountability, the 4 A's of propelling yourself from where you are to where you want to be. So, Coop, thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much. It was great.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 259 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. Right now, they got free shipping on orders over $59. Take advantage of that. Don't forget the special financing they have, and it's summit season. Come see me in Providence on the Sunday morning. The summit is from August 1st to the 4th. You can check more out about that at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Geralyn Coopersmith for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement, as well as personal development. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com and start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. Alwyn Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Eric Tagati and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name is Anthony Rennie. You can go to continuefit.com. Check out my resources. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.